Well, I mean, in the first place, it's illegal in Ghana to engage in, excuse me my language, anal sex. It's already a crime. Okay. The legislation seeks to widen the area of the law because the law says nothing about people living that as a lifestyle, just living it as a lifestyle. The law is presently silent. And what this bill seeks to do is to define LGBTQ in all its dimensions, and then seek to, criminalize it. The issues relating to the president and the vice president of the United States, I think the concern of a lot of people is that they expect the president to be upfront with the vice president of the United States when she brought the matter up and just indicate to her that, look, the people of my country are against this practice. Straightforward. I mean, so that she knows the sentiments of Ghanaians, because the expectation is that he has to appreciate that no matter his skills and knowledge in diplomacy, he also represents the country. And overwhelmingly, the people of the country are against that. And in several countries, not just U.S. vice presidents, even U.S. presidents have been met squarely by African presidents, telling them in the face that their people are against LGBTQ and anything that, goes with it. So Ghanaians were expecting the president to strongly advocate their position before the vice president, but he chose, as my colleague wants us to believe, to be diplomatic about it and actually create the impression that he might be able to do something about it when it ultimately gets to him after Parliament has passed it. I think basically that is the debate, that is the concern that I hear. And that is what Speaker Bawku was trying to put across. And truth be told, generally Ghanaians are against LGBTQ, and my colleague here has just expressed very strongly the thinking and how much many Ghanaians feel about LGBTQ. And I don't see how it will not pass in the parliament, because the MPs are representing their constituents. And given that our constituents are overwhelmingly against it, it will be difficult for any member of parliament to be seen not voting for this particular bill. Of course, people are going to ask that some caution should be taken into consideration. The Attorney General presented some opinion on certain issues. The committee took that on board. The committee, even members of the committee, including myself, we traveled to The Hague. We traveled to The Hague on some other program, but we knew that somehow it was partly just to draw our attention to the bill that is before us, which is the
proper
sexual human values bill. So international pressure has been mounting. We've taken all those into consideration. We also have an elaborate chapter on fundamental human rights in our Constitution. And you cannot pass a law that violates those provisions of the human rights provisions. So we've looked at all those ones, but even if we make a mistake and then pass a law that violates those rights in the Constitution, any citizen can actually go to court and set aside those provisions of the Constitution that violate those rights. So I see many of the issues ending in the courts.
The issues about
many of the provisions
in this
in this
LGBTQ, anti-LGBTQ bill
may end up in the courts, because what is going to happen is that we will pass it in Parliament. Somebody is going to be arrested and sent to court. And in the trial, the person is going to even raise the constitutionality of those provisions of the Act and say, look, this provision of the Act violates so and so provision of the Constitution of Ghana. And then it's going to be an interesting constitutional law litigation pertaining to the fundamental human rights provisions of the Constitution. So the matter won't end today. The matter might not end with the simple passage of the law. And also, you know, the reason why Ghanaians perhaps are worried about the sentiments expressed by the president is that people feel the sentiments do not reflect a very committed executive. Impression is that the executive is not too committed to this enterprise of dealing with members of the community if the law is passed. And you see, the legislature can only pass laws. The executive, you know, is the one that executes the laws. So people feel that you might just pass a law and then it won't be executed, because you may have an executive that is not really committed to the law. But let's not also deny the fact that the LGBTQ plus blah, blah, blah community have constituted themselves into a very powerful lobby, international lobby, and they are exerting pressure around the globe. I mean, you can imagine having the Vice President of the United States come into your country and then raise the issue with you at the time when you are globetrotting, begging for consideration to be allowed a package under the IMF, and then, you know, you are trying very hard to restructure your debt, and you're all over the place begging, and then the Vice President descends on you, Vice President of the U.S. descends on you on LGBTQ issues. Most people will try as much as possible to avoid the subject matter and appear non-committal in the matter. And I think that is what is going against the president as we speak. But the issues are straightforward. Ghanaians are against it. I believe the members of parliament, if the matter is being put to a vote, will vote approving the bill as it is, and pass on the responsibility to the executive.
So you say that for you, how things are going to play out, a number of the issues may end up at the Supreme Court for interpretation, regardless of this particular law reflecting the sentiments of the people. Okay, so will the Supreme Court, or can the Supreme Court rule in terms of interpretation regardless of how the people feel? Because this bill essentially is based on the traditions and culture and the sentiments of the people, which you say is going to influence how you, members of parliament, will vote on this matter. If somebody feels not too good about this and challenges some of the provisions of this bill at the Supreme Court, will the Supreme Court take a different route?
Well, you know, there's an area of human rights jurisprudence that the students of human rights jurisprudence will tell you is called cultural relativism.
Cultural relativism.
Yeah, cultural relativism, because the human rights has often come up against the cultures, norms, and values of societies. And these matters, either at international fora or in the courts, have to be resolved one way or the other. So what we are doing now is actually one such case of people's cultures, religious values, traditions, going against what people in the West consider as human rights. Mm-hmm. So our Constitution has a chapter on fundamental human rights, but there's no right to marry another man, mm-hmm. and there's no right for a woman to marry another woman. Mm-hmm. There's nothing there in the Constitution that talks about that. But in places like the US, in some states, not the entire US, even in the US, there are states that totally disagree with mm-hmm. a claim that gays have rights to practice those things that they practice. And so even in the US, it's not something that has become universal. The US, they are as equally politically divided on the matter, just as we are here, you know, as a country against the West generally. Just as in, you know, the Arab world, you know, this is a no-go area, and if you are caught, you might actually suffer the penalty of death. Even the Catholic Church, I'm told, is taking quite a hard stance. I don't know if what I've been reading is actually accurate.
The Pope is very sympathetic to them.
Well, but
the Pope personally.
But the church, how about the church? Well, what is the attitude of the church itself in relation to the issue? So there is this contestation out there, and I'm saying that, in my opinion, how it might play out is we will pass the law, and then some people will be arrested, and then when they go to court, they will be struggling to defend themselves. And one of the issues that they are going to bring up is to relate it to the human rights discourse, mm-hmm. and then now put the matter squarely before the courts to fine-tune the law relative to the human rights provisions. Mm-hmm. I don't know how the courts will, you know, manage the situation, but the courts are not immune to the political pressures, the social pressures, the religious influences mm-hmm. of their churches and their mosques, and their traditional belief systems and institutions, and their own, you know, human values, if I may put it mm-hmm. that way. So, you know, it's going to be a long haul. So those pushing shouldn't just think that it will end with the passage of a legislation. Okay. It's going to be a long haul. And I think that there's a clear determination by the Ghanaian society to prevent a situation where mm-hmm. we allow the community to function and operate in such a way that they will influence young people, mm-hmm. because it's built around influence. Indeed. And if you allow people to live it and express themselves, as you may find in some cultures in Europe, the fact of they living it and expressing themselves to younger people has a tendency to influence those younger people. Mm-hmm. And that basically is what this legislation is seeking to do, to prevent you from being able to express it. You know, as it is now, people are engaged in gay, lesbian activities, but it is covert. They are hiding mm-hmm. and doing so. Mm-hmm. But there's a push to allow them to do it openly. And mm-hmm. the fear is that if you allow them to do it openly, then you will have a difficulty managing the influence that they can have over the younger generation. Mm-hmm. For those who are old and grown and have gone past their formative years, they might be able to prevent themselves from getting lured into these things. But for the younger ones, So really it's a fight to protect the younger generation. So that is what I think it is.
See, but even regardless of this, I mean, that influence is actually ongoing. I mean, maybe I would agree to the extent that if it is now allowed to be done openly, the extent of influence may be more. But there are so many means that young people are being influenced to do so many things virtually, that's through the internet. And so if you're preventing them doing it openly, there is also these other means that they can be influenced, which will not be open, but they would eventually, the end objective of their being influenced would happen.
Well, that's true. I mean, you watch movies and you will find likable characters playing the role of LGBTQ community members. So you're watching a movie that you really like, and then a certain character that you are made to like, because that's how movies are done. A certain character that...
In fact, there are actually some cartoons.
Yes, you are made to like, ends up, presenting he or herself as a member of that community. And so it has a way of influencing your thinking about it. And, cartoons and other, media that people use to shape the minds of young people. So that is happening. And the idea of this legislation, as much as possible, is to prevent those things from happening. Now, like you said, there are all sort of, activities in bars, in nightclubs, we've been told about LGBTQ parties, that happen in Ghana. I mean, since we started looking at this bill, we've received, presentations, and we've had hearings involving people who have taken us through what is happening in the country and why they want this legislation passed. So there is a huge move. There's a huge move to convert people, to convert young people into the community, and it is fast, growing in terms of adherents and practitioners, and quite scary, if you ask me, and that is what is driving parliamentarians as they push for this legislation. And that is why I say that people's concern following listening to the president is that they do not see a commitment, a clear expressed commitment. And so the question really is, if you go through all the trouble to pass this legislation and there's no such commitment in enforcement, what really will you be achieving? And that's one thing. But then also there are those who think that the language of the bill and the way that it has been expressed is so broad, and then it will also incite people to get violent on LGBTQ community members. And so if you look at Amnesty International reports on Ghana, they've persistently highlighted instances of violations of the rights of people alleged to be members of the LGBTQ community. But that's what will happen if the law enforcement agencies don't act. The law enforcement agencies don't act, the communities will act. The communities will resort to, imposing the penalties themselves. So
the police service is determined to protect them.
Yeah, they will resort to lynching and attacks and beatings and all sorts of maltreatment if the law enforcement agencies do not sit up and then perform their responsibilities under the law. So that is what we might end up seeing if we don't have a very committed executive to implement the law when it is passed.
Okay.